Hello, and welcome to the Cash Car Convert Podcast, Episode 19.
You're listening to the Cash Car Convert Podcast with James Kinson.
Hello, and welcome to the Cash Car Convert Podcast. My name is James Kinson, and I am the Cash Car Convert. This is the podcast where cash cars are cool and auto debt is dangerous to your financial future. I'm really excited to be coming and giving you this episode today. I'm starting to fall out of new and noteworthy within iTunes, so my podcast is going to be even more difficult to find out in iTunes. But I'm excited today because I feel like I've had a good journey there. I've gotten exposure to a lot of different folks, and I'm hoping that my message has resonated with some of them. So if you're out there and you're a listener and my message has resonated with you, reach out and let me know. You can leave a comment on my website, cashcarconvert.com/019, and that'll be the episode show notes for this particular episode. You could also just drop me an email at cashcarconvert@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me on Twitter at cashcarconvert, and I'd love to hear from my listeners. So thank you so much for the support you've given me thus far, and I look forward to continuing to share my message with you as we move forward. On today's episode, I'm going to talk about how to purchase a quality used car and where we are in the buying process. We've now done our research, we've found our car, we've inspected it, and we've done all the due diligence we need to around that. Our mechanic has inspected it, and we're ready to make the purchase. So in today's show, we're going to talk about how to go through that process of actually negotiating with the seller and some of the paperwork you may have to contend with around actually buying that car. But before I jump into that portion of the episode, I've been fortunate enough that my message has gotten out there, and I have recently been interviewed on 3 podcasts beyond the Social Business Podcast, which was my episode 18 message. And I wanted to just thank those people for having me on. And I also, as those episodes are available, I'll be sharing them with you and tweeting them out and letting everybody know when they're out. One of them is already out there. That's the interview I did with Ellery Wells of the Empowered Podcast. Ellery and I met at a meetup at the Platform Conference, and he and I have been staying in touch via social media ever since. Then we also met up at NMX, and actually he brought his wife to NMX, and we all hung out quite a bit. And so I got to know Ellery quite well there, as well as his wife Ashley, 2 really great people. And so it was really a pleasure for me to be able to be on Ellery's show. And it was kind of funny. It was an impromptu episode. Ellery was on Facebook, and he reached out and said, is anybody able to do an interview? So I reached back to him and said, hey, I do have a little time. And so he and I spent probably 20 or 30 minutes just with an impromptu interview. And I had a lot of fun with it. Hopefully you'll check it out. And you can find Ellery's podcast at the empoweredpodcast.com. That's the empoweredpodcast.com. Now, the next podcast that I was interviewed on is the Word of the Week podcast with Pete Stone. And Pete and I met through him reaching out to me about a car situation that he had. And so he and I were able to connect over that. We've traded a number of emails since. We've stayed in touch via social media, but he and I had never actually spoken directly. And he asked me to do an interview for his podcast. And so I did that here in the last week. And it's one of the really nice things about podcasting and being involved in social media. It gives you the opportunity to reach out and get to know people that you would have never met otherwise. And I've already seen that happen on a number of occasions, and this is another one. Pete and I really seem to resonate. I think we connect well, and I think you'll enjoy listening to the interview that he has. And when his episode comes out, I'll certainly be letting you know. But right now, I just want to thank him for giving me the time on his show to tell a bit about my story and hopefully help a few people understand why they ought to be driving cash cars. The third episode, or the third podcast I was interviewed on recently was a new podcast that hasn't launched yet, but it will be launching soon. So I'm going to put the word out and have you start looking out for Matt Lovell. Matt is somebody that I met at NMX this year, and he was also in my podcasting A to Z class that Cliff Ravenscraft puts on, which we all just went through. Those of us that were in that class went through in February. It's a 4-week class to help teach you how to be a better podcaster. And with Cliff Ravenscraft having produced over 3,000 podcasts and taught thousands of podcasters how to do it, he goes by the moniker the podcast answer man, and it's quite accurate. But Matt and I met at NMX, and then we also, again, we were in the same podcasting A to Z class, so we reconnected there. Matt's starting a show called Minding the Gap, and it's a show about intentional living. And Matt asked me to come on again and tell a little bit about my story, and to talk a little bit about cash cars and why people ought to be considering them as a lifestyle choice rather than the current one that most people have, which is living with auto debt. So I thank those 3 guys for having me on their shows and helping me get my message out there. As I said, Ellery's show is out. That's at theempoweredpodcast.com. You can find that episode. And I would encourage you to go out and give that a listen. I think we had a lot of fun recording it, and we've gotten some good feedback on it from people who've listened to it. The other 2, again, I'll let you know when those are out, and I look forward to having my listeners take those in as well. Okay, I think we're ready to go ahead and jump into our episode here. And this is something that I'm really excited about, because this is the time in the car buying process that really kind of gets me going. It's the part where I'm really going to buy that car that I've been looking at, that I've been researching. And even though it's a used car, and even though I'm paying cash for it, it's new to me. And I really take a lot of pleasure in having the fruits of my labor come to fruition. So it's really nice to be able to drive a quality used car home after all that work. As I stated earlier in the podcast, if you followed the episodes that led up to this, then you've gone through and you've done your car research. You've found a car that makes sense for you. You've eliminated cars that were too expensive to maintain or too unreliable. You've eliminated cars that just flat didn't feel right, or that you felt like that the seller hadn't maintained properly. And this is a point where, the interview I did with Jim Monchback on the Social Business Podcast, he talked about that. Give yourself opportunities to walk away, and that's certainly something that I agree with as well. So, at this point, you've now found one that you don't feel like you can walk away from, and you're ready to move forward. The other thing you've done is you've qualified this car in terms of its value. You've checked Edmunds and Kelley Blue Book and other sources, and you've validated that the price that's being asked is a reasonable price. And that doesn't always mean it's absolutely at or below the price that is in a Kelley Blue Book or an Edmunds, because you may actually find a car that is in such good condition that you're willing to pay a little more than what a private seller's price would typically be. And that's a call you have to make on your own, but it's something I'll reiterate later in the episode. But it's really important to realize that if you pay another $100 or $200 more for a vehicle at the buying stage, that's going to save you $2,000 or $3,000 in the repair stage, you're ahead of the game. So getting the last nickel out of the negotiated price isn't always the right thing to do. But at this point, you've qualified the car in terms of its value, you know what it's worth, and you're comfortable that you're getting at least a reasonable price for that you can live with and feel good about after the deal. At this point, you've gone through and you've screened the car. You've screened the seller. You've done that by phone. You've reviewed the owner's personal records. The car has passed your subsequent on-site personal inspection, and you've taken it to your mechanic and had a thorough inspection. And after you've done all of this, you've done your test drive, you've done all those things. Now, finally, you're ready to get together with the seller and negotiate your closing price on this particular vehicle. As I stated earlier, and I know I'll catch some heat from some people on this because I know some people are really big about negotiating to the nth degree and leaving absolutely nothing on the table. And while I certainly want to get the most for my money, there's something that's even more important to me, and that is getting a car that I can depend on for the next 2 to 5 years. And that's a lot more important to me than getting an extra $100 off the purchase price. I think the other thing to think of here too is that, at this point, if you've gone through my steps, you've spent a lot of time working to find a seller who shows a pride of ownership in their vehicle. And so one of the things that isn't too surprising about that is that the seller may very well think that their car is worth potentially more than it might actually be in the market because of the meticulous way they've maintained it. So the upside is you're getting a really great car based on the price, but the owner may actually think that it's worth more than what the market says it is. And again, to kind of put this in context again, and I hope you don't feel like I'm belaboring this point, but if you were to go to a used car dealership, Kelley Blue Book and Edmunds.com, they automatically assume that you're going to pay more for a vehicle because they say a vehicle is worth more when it's sold at a dealership than when it's sold by a private seller. So that's something, again, I would tell you to keep in mind. Even though the private seller price is something that's out there and you can see it and you can find out what it is, be aware that, if you were going to a dealership to buy the exact same vehicle, you might pay, anywhere from hundreds to thousands more for the exact same vehicle. So if you found one that you really are comfortable with and that you believe is going to be a good car for you, then again, I would negotiate the price, but I wouldn't be penny wise and pound foolish. Now, having said all that about how the price isn't the be all end all in this particular decision, I do have a strategy that's worked pretty well for me when I've gone to buy cars for cash, and I think it'll help you get the most for your money. One of the key benefits of using cash is that it can be an enticement to a seller. What I'll typically do is I'll determine how much I'm willing to pay for a car, and I'll bring that much in either cash or a cashier's check. And for those of you who maybe aren't too familiar with how that might work, with a cashier's check, you can have that made out to you, and then you can endorse that over to a seller, and that's effectively the same as cash to them. So that's another route, and it's safer, obviously, than actually bringing cash to a deal. But I will say cash is more enticing. There's just something about having cash. It's harder to part with when you have it in your hands. That's the reason the people who use the envelope system for buying their groceries and paying their bills and everything tend to spend less money than people who use credit cards or even debit cards. So cash is a big enticement. So I do like the idea of buying cash, and that's just something that you'll have to get comfortable with whether you want to do it that way or not. Again, I've done it both ways, and I just think that's a personal preference thing that you'll have to get through. But either way, you have a pretty good enticement to the customer because it whether you're there with a cash or a cashier's check, it is the same as cash to them. The other thing I'll say is that when you're bringing the cashier's check, you should bring some additional cash to cover any additional negotiation there. Now, because you're coming in with this cashier's check as an enticement to get them to sell at the price that you're willing to go with. And let's just arbitrarily pick an example here and say that you're going to use you want to pay $4,000 for a vehicle, and maybe it was advertised for $4,300 or something like that. So I would bring the $4,000 in cash, and then I would bring some additional cash just in case up to the selling price as a way of negotiating that. And when the seller sees the cash, I've seen oftentimes that will close the deal. That knowing that they're that close to getting that money and selling the car, it will get them to go ahead and come to agreement with you and allow you to move the deal forward. And in the event that doesn't move the deal forward, then I can negotiate with the seller, go back and forth until we come to an agreement. And one of the things I'm going to be really careful about here is, I try not to, one negotiating tactic that some people will tell you is to point out all the flaws in a vehicle. And that's certainly a way to go. I find personally, I don't like that when somebody does it to me. And a lot of times, it's actually only happened a couple of times, but I've actually refused to sell to somebody because of some of the things they said about the vehicle. When I know I'm selling a really good vehicle, I'm insulted if somebody's going to tell me that there's all these things wrong with it or all this concern that they have. So that's something that's that's in my temperament. it may be in the seller's temperament, especially if they have a pride of ownership in their vehicle. So I would caution you to be careful about using that tactic too aggressively. It's certainly okay to point out a few things. If there's money that you have to spend on something, let's say, for instance, the tires are about to be gone and you're going to have to replace those, that's worth mentioning and that's worth bringing up. But again, I would be careful about insulting somebody's quote-unquote pride and joy. The other thing I'll say here, kind of in getting close to wrapping up this piece, is that one of the things I'm pretty confident about is that I'm going to close the deal with the seller. I've typically already made up my mind that if I had to pay the full purchase price and I have the cash in hand to do that, I'm ultimately going to do that. I've done a lot of work to get to this point, and I don't want to lose the deal at this point if I believe I'm getting a reasonable deal for me at the moment. So I'm going to be very careful to negotiate this deal in such a way that I'm going to come away with this vehicle at the end of it, because I've done all the due diligence at this point. So I want to make sure that I am able to take advantage of all the hard work I've already done and walk away with the vehicle at the end of it. Once the price has been agreed, then the purchase can be made. The money and all the car keys will change hands, and so that'll kind of get the process kicked off. But there's a lot of other things that have to happen to get a car sold. And before I jump into that, I just want to make a little note here that you should always be certain to ask for the car's maintenance and repair records. And the reason for that is you want to add those because you're going to add your records to them. And when you someday get ready to sell this car, it's going to be more valuable to the person you're selling to because of the history that this vehicle has and how far back these records go. So I would encourage you to make sure at this point when you're negotiating and wrapping up this sale to be sure and get that paperwork as part of the transaction. The next thing to do is the paperwork around ultimately buying this car. If the car is financed, then the paperwork will likely need to be done at a bank or a financing company of some sort, and they'll have all they'll have the title for the vehicle and they'll have all the documents that are necessary to close the transaction. And since that's the case, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here discussing how it works when you take this transaction to a bank to do a title transfer. They are well versed in how to do that, and they can definitely help you through that process. If you have questions about that, I would encourage you to call your bank and talk to them about how that title transfer process works at your bank, and they can certainly walk you through that. If the car doesn't have any debt, then the seller should have the title showing proof of ownership. And this title should show that the seller has free and clear ownership and therefore has the right to sell the car. If you see any kind of lien on the document, then that means that title is not one that gives the seller the right to sell. I know I live in the state of Texas, and in the state of Texas, a blue title is a free and clear title, and if it's a duplicate title with a lien, then it's a pink color. At least the last time I transacted one of these deals in Texas, that was the case. So you can tell pretty clearly, and I suspect most states will have something along those lines, or whatever government entity allows you to do title transfers. There's some way to tell that a car has a lien on it, and you can be sure and check that out. The best case for a title transfer is for both the seller and buyer to jointly go to the local government entity to complete all the paperwork and start the title transfer process. Sometimes this isn't possible and it can't happen. There can be many reasons for this, but the outcome will be the buyer and seller will need to complete all the relevant portions of the transfer documents while they're both together. Then the seller can take these documents to their local government office and complete the transfer of title. As a buyer, I would recommend you go to the website of your local government entity and determine what paperwork is needed to complete the title transfer. I know in the U.S. it's likely to be your state's motor vehicle department, and I've done some research on this, and they can be called a lot of different names depending on which state you're in. A lot of them are actually handled by the taxing entity in that state, so just be sure and check that out. And once you get to that website, then you can print off any of the relevant forms that you need, and you can take them with you when you go to purchase the car so that you'll have everything you need pulled together. Now, whether your local government website says this or not, personally I would start by creating a bill of sale. And some government sites will actually have a sample bill of sale on there that you can draw from. But the relevant facts that you would want on this bill of sale would include the seller's name, the buyer's name, the date of the sale, the purchase price, and include the year, make, model, and vehicle identification number of the car being purchased. Now, as the buyer, you should be aware that most of the time there's going to be a tax due when you purchase your vehicle. So you should plan for that when you're budgeting for your cash car. If you're financing a car, it's much easier to have that just rolled in and you don't really feel the effects of that very much. But if you're buying a car for cash, then those taxes are due at the time that you transfer the title. So you need to make sure that you've accounted for that when you are doing your due diligence and homework on your state's title transfer policies. And again, the government website should tell you how much that would be, so you can calculate that in advance and know what you're looking at. There's typically also some fees around title transfer, and some states, in Texas now, you have to get new plates for your vehicle whenever you do a title transfer. So there may be some additional unique things that have to be done, but all of those things will be found on your Department of Motor Vehicles website for your state or government entity. And for anything that you can think of that I haven't covered here, I would just tell you to go to that government website and query them. And if you can't find it on the website, then pick up the phone and give them a call. And definitely your local government entity will be the best source for what's required to transfer a title in their locality. So I would certainly specify that you go and do that. At this point, if you followed all the episodes that I've put together up to this point around how to buy a car and how to inspect it, then you should have a quality used car. You should have gotten it at a fair price. You should have gotten through the title transfer process without too much drama, and the negotiation for that matter. And you should have a car now that'll last you and your family 2 to 5 years. And that, the time frame I'm throwing out there, it just depends on what your goals are. You can certainly, depending on the car you buy, you can maintain it and likely get it to last longer than those numbers. But with the average American trading cars about every 3 to 4 years, I think 2 to 5 is a reasonable number for a cash car that you might be buying right now. Hopefully, if you're buying a cash car because you're in debt, because you're trying to clean up your credit mess, that would give you time to get most of that under control. And again, if you're setting aside the car payments you're making today in a fund to help you maintain this vehicle that you're buying, as well as to prepare you for the next vehicle, then I think you'll be in good stead. All right, that's going to wrap up this episode. So I hope you've enjoyed this. To recap, it was really trying to help people negotiate the car once they've actually found the car that they want, and then also what to do to get through the title transfer process. And I think those the tips here are, they're not earth-shattering. They're mostly common sense kinds of things. I think most people know that cash carries more weight than a check or a credit card, that we feel that pull towards it or to keep it a lot more so if it's cash in hand. The other thing is on the title transfer process. I know some people who've only ever bought cars at a dealership might be intimidated by that process. So I thought it was important to try and bring that information here, even at a very high level, to just kind of talk you through what's required there. The other thing, for those of you who live in the United States, I do have a map of the U.S., and it's all 50 states, and it's clickable, and I put together all of the Department of Motor Vehicle or title transfer contact website information for the 50 states. So if you go out to my website, www.cashcarconvert.com, you'll find that link up in the header, and it's a clickable 50-state map. And you can click on that and find your state, and that'll help you determine who your Department of Motor Vehicles is if you're not sure. The next thing I would say is if you want to go review any of the show notes for this episode, you can find them at cashcarconvert.com/019. And I hope you will go out there and take a look at the show notes and leave a comment. Now that I've kind of got through the entire car buying process, if you have questions, you can leave those in the comments there. If you think this has been helpful to you, I'd love to hear from you on that front as well. So please feel free to put that out there. If you like this podcast and you feel like it's beneficial to you, and I'm going to continue to bring relevant content to you as we move forward. How to maintain a car, how to find a good mechanic. I'm going to continue to interview people who have inspiring stories. So if you find these episodes helpful, I would encourage you to go out to iTunes and subscribe to the podcast, the Cash Car Convert podcast. And once you've subscribed, I would encourage you to leave a rating and review. This again helps me to be relevant within iTunes, and for them to know that I'm a podcast that has listeners who are engaged, and that'll help me move up the rankings and be found more easily. And this will be even more critical now that I'm out of new and noteworthy in iTunes. So I would encourage you to go out there and do that if you think this show is worthy of a rating and review. If you want to connect with me directly, you can contact me on Twitter at CashCarConvert. Again, that's at CashCarConvert. I just want to take a moment and say I appreciate every listener. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to let me speak into your life. And I hope that the conversations I'm having are helping to encourage you to look into cash cars and to look at cars differently and to look at your life more intentionally and to put compound interest to work for you rather than the finance companies. So remember, invest in yourself, not things. Thank you so much for listening to the Cash Car Convert podcast. And I want to help you buy a cash car and kick auto debt to the curb. Thank you so much for listening.
I'm in my out, my up, my down, I'm happy all the time. I'm in my out, my up, my down, I'm happy all the time. Since Jesus Christ sent in and washed my sins from sin, I'm in my out, my up, my down, I'm happy all the time.